All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is James. I'm from the Education Department here at the Aquarium of the Pacific down in Long Beach. We're going to have a class about habitats today. We have a special one in mind, but while we're talking about that, this is an opportunity for you to also interact with us. So not only are we going to teach you a little bit about a very special habitat, you can ask us questions right here at this text number, 562-286-1838. Go ahead and text in your questions, and Luke is over at the computer to help relay those to me, or he'll be able to answer some of them himself. And we have Dana controlling the computer, helping behind the scenes. And when you text, make sure you remember that text rates do apply. And if you're one of our younger viewers, make sure you have a permission from the adults around you, or you have an adult help you out, just so you can make sure you get your question in correctly, because we want to hear from you. Now, if you're not watching live, that's okay. You can still participate and give us your questions. We have this email right here, live@lbaop.org, and you can email us questions even if you're not watching live. All right, well, we have a special habitat that we want to talk about today. It's a little different because it's also hard to narrow down just the idea of it, because there's not like a specific line that it fits into. Like, tide pools are a specific spot. Dana's going to talk about tide pools later today, so we're going to leave that out of it. It's not like open ocean where it's like, there's nothing here except water. It's big and blue. It's not like a forest where there's trees. It's a forest. It's a space that really is hard to define. It's called a coastal ocean. So it includes a lot of different areas. It can include the wetlands. It can include the river mouths. It can include part of the kelp forest habitat. It can include a little bit of the open ocean habitat. So it's kind of this big umbrella of all the things near the land. That's a very big habitat to talk about. Well, challenge accepted. We're going to see if we can do it. Okay. Let's go back to our kelp forest exhibit, Amber Forest, and let's talk about some of the characteristics of the habitat, some of the things that the animals have to contend with in order to survive, some of the characteristics of this habitat too. So we're going to make observations. We're all scientists here. All of you at home are scientists with us today. You're going to be making observations and asking questions, and we're going to investigate those questions. What do you observe? What do you notice about this space? There's a few different kinds of animals. We saw the shark swimming around. That's Sam the shark. We have our rockfish. We have some eels hiding in here somewhere. There was one in here. I'm not sure if it's still in that space, but we have some eels hiding in the exhibit. We have a giant sea bass right there. He's like peeking around the corner. You can barely see Utaka the sea bass. There's a lot of variety just in this one space. And this is one exhibit we have here at the aquarium. This is part of the kelp forest habitat. When kelp can live fairly far off the coastline, it depends on how deep the water is. Generally, giant kelp like this stuff right here, this is called Macrocystis, or just giant kelp. This really tall one might grow to a depth of 100 feet. Now, it's not growing from the top down like roots do from a tree. It's growing from the sea floor up. And it's an algae, and algae need sunlight. So we can see the lights shining in this exhibit. So that's one of the things that a kelp forest segment of this habitat requires is sunlight. And after about 100 feet of depth, there's really not enough light left to have the giant kelp grow. So the kelp forest might go from like 0 feet of depth to maybe 100 feet of depth. So that can be pretty far out. Depends on the space we call the continental shelf. Okay, so we'll get into what that is in a second. Now, the kelp forest is just what we have here locally. You can have coral reefs that are coastal or a kelp forest. So those are the two big main ideas of what a habitat kind of looks like on the coastline. But this can include a lot of different things. So there's sharks. Yeah, there's sharks in a coastal habitat. There's a lot of different fish. And there's a very special animal that hangs out coastally here on the west coast of the United States and on the east coast. Now I'm going to show you a model skull of this one particular animal. There we go. Who is this? What is this animal? Ooh, it's got pointy little teeth, long snout. It's a dolphin. This is the bottlenose dolphin. So along our east and west coasts here of North America, there are coastal bottlenose, which are really interesting animals. So not only do we get the fish and the sharks and all the other little things, we get dolphins that hang out within the 2-mile line of the coastline. And scientists are doing a lot to study them. We here have done a lot of observation on our whale watches with our photo ID internship program to photograph and monitor the coastal bottlenose dolphins. And we can try to identify each individual dolphin if they've been spotted before and they're part of the records. We use their dorsal fin to try and figure out who they are. And we found out that these dolphins will go completely up and down the west coast. A dolphin that was seen here in California was found also way up in Washington State. That's a very narrow range, 2 miles along the entire coastline. So that's kind of a coastal habitat for them. We don't know why exactly they don't really go more than 2 miles off, but they really don't venture more than 2 miles away. So that's an interesting kind of geographic choice. Here's a picture of a bottlenose. And the way we identify them are the notches and scratches that are on their dorsal fin. So bottlenose are gray in color, and the offshore, the ones that say more than 2 miles off, they'd be in the open ocean habitat. They look a little different than the coastal bottlenose do, and it's because they really don't intermix. The offshores and the coastals don't have babies together. Not sure why. Maybe it does every once in a while, but we haven't observed it too often where they crisscross each other's habitat. So in the coastal habitat, we even get dolphins. That's really interesting. All right. What is a continental shelf, you asked? It's a big question. Well, before I answer that, Miss Paraga's class is asking, what part of the ocean do crabs live in? And Nina's asking is, can kelp die? So those two questions. Where are the crabs? Well, crabs live in a lot of varieties of the ocean. They pretty much live at all depths. From right at the coastline, the little hermit crabs that live right next to the rocks and the seaweed. You even go down during a tide, low tide, you can see them. Dan will talk about them later. And then you can go really deep in the ocean and find other crabs. We have giant spider crabs here at the aquarium, and they usually live at a pretty good depth. Their exhibit water is only about 46 degrees, which is pretty chilly. So giant spider crabs can live at extreme depths. And there's other crabs that live in hydrothermal vents. There's a lot of crabs that live very, very, very deep in the ocean. Now, can kelp die? Yes, it does. It is a living thing. And if it can't gather enough nutrients or can't do enough photosynthesis where it's not collecting enough sunlight and turning it into energy for itself, or if it gets washed up on land, it can die. And just like plants can die if there's not the right conditions for them, or if something happens, they're injured, they're sick. I mean, plants and algae can get sick too. That's kind of an interesting thing to talk about. So yeah, they could die. And that's kind of a hazard. So in this space along our coastline, if that kelp were to die, all of it, that takes away a lot of the home for a lot of these animals that live along the coastline. All right. Let's go back to talking about the continental shelf because it's a space that kind of helps us define a coastal habitat. That explains everything, right? Okay, so here's what's happening. In this thing behind me here, this should be the depth marker that you can see these numbers. These are probably in meters because in science, we record stuff in meters. So the closer to red you are, the more shallow you are. Green is kind of a medium. Purple and blue are pretty deep. So this dark space right here is land. Okay, so the dark black area is land, or like right here is an island. So near the land, is it deep or shallow? Well, it's kind of shallow. Now, this is California. Is this California, Dana? We don't know. This came from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, so this could be anywhere in the world. But let's pretend it's California, because in California, it gets deep pretty quickly away from the land, and it's kind of shallow for a little bit, and then we get something like this, a drop-off. So this big flat area next to the land that's underwater is called a continental shelf. It's around the continents. Do you know your 7 continents? All 7 of them? Well, we're just going to worry about North America for the moment. So right next to the continent is the continental shelf. And then it starts getting really deep and really deep until we get into what are called the abyssal plains, where there are really deep, flat areas that are not right next to the continents. Now, depending on the coastline, this drop-off right here Goes along. Could be really close to land. Think of South America, new continent. Hey, we're going to have to name a few of them. Next to Chile, it gets really deep really fast. They don't really have a very wide continental shelf. So there's not a lot of coastal habitat that's shallow. East Coast friends on the east coast of South America and North America, there's quite a wide continental shelf. So there's a lot of space where it's not awfully deep the farther away you get from land, and then suddenly it drops off real fast as you get down into the abyssal plains. So we're thinking of this space that's wide and flat underwater that is our coastal habitat. It can include really deep spaces, like here in California, Southern California anyways, over by Palos Verdes. It gets pretty deep pretty fast. You could only be half a mile offshore, and you're over 1,000 feet of depth. So there's a few spaces that gets really deep really quickly, but it's still our coastal habitat. So the challenges are, you could have a very shallow zone that supports only a certain few kinds of animals because the kelp lives there. Then it gets really deep really fast right after that, and there's no kelp. It can't grow. It's too deep. So you have to have different things that can survive there. So the coastal region is this big, nebulous, gray area of undescribable things. Well, we can describe it some. All right, we got a few more questions. Kendall asked, do jellies live in saltwater? Jellies live in salt and freshwater. What? Yeah, there are freshwater jellies. There are some in a few different lakes in the world, and we actually have some that they can live in lakes. Their close cousins could live in lakes. And they're a type of spotted or lagoon jelly. Our lagoon jellies are saltwater jellies, but there are some spotted jellies that do live in lakes. Why is kelp green and gold? And actually, it's kind of brown and weird and blue and green and red. It's got a lot of colors. All right, here's my kelp model. That's better. All right. So the kelp we see behind me here, the color comes from what are called pigments. So have you ever played with paint? You got to be careful because you don't want to get paint everywhere, right? You need to wash it out if it gets on something else. So paint color is caused by something called a pigment. It's a molecule that allows us to see that color. So what happens, the reason I have a red collar is because the light that comes in and bounces off of it, the red light bounces back to your eyeballs, and that's how you see red. So when we see kind of the greenish, brownish, gold color of kelp, the pigment that's in the kelp, it allows us to see that color. So there is what we call the red algae. There's some that are very dark red. There's some that are just kind of pink. And then there's the green algae group. Now, scientists are reclassifying who's in what group because we're learning so much more about kelp and seaweed that we can't really just call it green algae anymore. There might be multiple groups of green algae that we have to separate into smaller groups. So they kind of look really green. One of my favorites is called ulva. It's called, nickname is sea lettuce. It really looks just like lettuce in your salad, and it's very, very bright green. Whereas kelp is kind of this greenish brown. And then, like I said, the red algae can be a range of pink to very dark red. So it's those pigments, it's those molecules in their bodies that allow them to be a different color. Now, you won't see a red algae looking really blue. And a little bit of iridescence, but it's not really the pigment that's in their body. It's kind of the skin or what's called like the cuticle of the algae. And a green algae won't really look that brown unless it's not very healthy. So they have very specific amounts of pigment in their bodies that allow them to be green or brown or red. Just like the paints in our jar. We can mix them together, make new colors, but if it's just red, it's just always going to be red. It doesn't suddenly turn green for reasons that we didn't put in there, all right? Okay, Dana has a picture of sea lettuce. Ulva. U-L-V-A. That's how you spell that. Hold on. All right, while she's looking at that. What is my favorite Pacific animal? Here's some ulva right here. Very green. And it has some red algae next to it. Very red. So ulva will grow very coastally. It's all over the place. It's actually one of the first types of algae that grows on a rock at the coastline before more algae grows after that. That's kind of a cool factoid. All right, what is my favorite Pacific animal? That's really hard to narrow down. Now, I'm the whale expert here at the aquarium, so I do really love whales. Lots of whales. My favorite whale is either the blue whale, because they're so amazingly large and majestic, or the Pacific white-sided dolphin, which I grew up in Colorado. not a lot of whales in Colorado, so I came out to the coastline. And the Pacific white-sided was so very different from what I had always imagined as a dolphin. It just stuck with me. That's one of my favorite dolphins. All right. Now, Dana's looking for pictures of the animals I was just saying, and there really aren't any in the computer right now, so that's okay. We can get some for later. How big can... There's a blue whale. How big can a spider crab be? Well, next to this whale, it's about this big. Okay, I'm kidding. So spider crabs actually can get pretty big. I think there's a picture of a spider crab that we can show you. Here at our aquarium, I don't think they're bigger than about 8 feet across, but I think the biggest a spider crab has ever been measured when they stretch their legs out straight, I think it's 12 to 15 feet or more wide. And their bodies, their central body is not awfully large, but their legs are really, really long and spindly. So here is a spider crab. And then those two in the back are like, I don't know what they're doing. But, so there's some spider crabs. There's Luke's reflection. Hello, Luke. And the crabs here are not super large, but that could just be part of their age. It could just be that they don't get that big. Now, for most animals in the ocean especially, we always talk about the biggest one, how big they have ever gotten. So that's kind of a weird thing to talk about because with people we don't say that. We usually say the average of how big a person is. We don't really talk about how big the biggest person is. So with animals in the ocean, we usually just have the biggest range. All right. Miss Manuel's class is asking, what is the best area for dolphins to find food when they're near Los Angeles? Well, it kind of depends. Remember, if you're a coastal dolphin, you don't stay, or you do stay within the 2-mile line. You don't really go farther than that. They'll find fish or squid or maybe even octopus in that line, in that very narrow space along the coastline. There's enough animals in there for them to feed on. And the reason is because there's not thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands or millions of them like there are the offshore dolphins. The offshore dolphins have a lot more space to be, a lot more food and resources to be in. So the North American coastal bottlenose really stay within that small area, and there's enough food for the population that is there. I'm not even sure how many there are. There's thousands of them, but I'm not sure what the total count is because they haven't all been identified yet. And we can estimate, but it's a really weird math equation that I don't even know, so I can't tell you how many there are, but there's quite a few, and they eat just little fish and squid that live within our coastal ocean. All right, let's take another look at something that's along the coastline. Dana's going to give me a surprise. Let's see what Dana can throw up there. She's asking animal or habitat. What would you like to watch? Let's look at an animal first that lives along the coastline. Then let's see if we can figure out the habitat space it goes into. See if we can narrow this idea of the coastal ocean, which is a big, not like designated zone. And let's see if we can narrow it down to what we would consider the actual space this animal lives in. I stumped her. She wasn't ready for this. Okay, so remember, we can have kelp forest, we can have coral reef spaces, we can have deep ocean, we have shallow ocean spaces, all along the coastline. So there's a large variety of animals and things that will live in this space. Do you recognize this? What's it doing? Come back, Mr. Octopus or Miss Octopus. I can't tell from this picture. Oh, that's so cool. So this is an octopus. Wait, that part right there. Do you recognize this chunk? What is this octopus doing? What is this stuff? This is a coral reef habitat. So we've kind of talked about California things, but this is a reef habitat which is coastal. Now the reef, like this kind of reef, also relies on sunlight. So coral reefs like this, they really aren't going to be really, really deep in the ocean. There are deep ocean corals, but these rely on sunlight. So in that space, it has the same thing. They need enough light, they need enough food, but in a coral reef, it tends to be a little bit brighter and the water's a little bit more clear than here in a kelp forest habitat along the coastline. And the reason is, remember that map picture we showed you? That depth that we got real deep? Here in California, we get these ocean currents that are vertical. So you can see ocean currents that are horizontally move the ocean around. And then there's these really big, deep ones that bring nutrient-rich water from the depth up to the surface. It's called upwelling. And that gives all the kelp, the plankton, and all the little things that live here in California food to survive. But in the coral reef, It's a little different. It's not cold water that they need warm water, but not too warm. If it's too warm, they won't survive quite as well either. And then they need all that bright sunlight because there's an algae, little microscopic single-celled one that lives inside each coral, and it's kind of like having a roommate that you're always next to in the same room, and one gives the other energy, and you give that one a space to be in. That's a great deal. So coral needs a lot of sunlight. At least the tropical corals that like we think of need a lot of sunlight. Okay, we had a few more questions pop in. Ramiro's asking, what is this giant squid's habitat? I'm glad you asked. We don't have a picture of a giant squid, but we have a picture of a big squid. We'll get a picture of that up while we get to Miss Ayers' class. What lives in deeper areas? Scientists aren't even totally sure. Well, there's a lot of animals that live in the deep ocean, like a giant squid. There's lots of different fish. There's lots of different invertebrates like crabs or squid or octopus. There's jellies. There's things called siphonophores. There's a lot of variety in the deep ocean. We think of the deep ocean as this like open desert of nothingness. Nothing lives there, but that's not really true. What we're finding in every dive that the scientists go down with a remote sub is that there's more down there than we ever expected. There's so much life, there's so much diversity that lives in the deep ocean. Things that, it's like anytime we would be looking at these animals, it's something we imagined and drew when we were your age, when we had all this beautiful imagination flowing out of us, and we just would imagine, what could this animal possibly look like? We found one that looks like that. That's cool. Okay, you guys ready? We found the giant squid habitat. This is it. Remember how we said the ocean is big and blue? It's also kind of dark. How do you survive in the deep ocean? Well, usually you get bigger eyes. Squid actually have some of the biggest eyes for body size in general. Do we have the picture of the Humboldt that we can show them? All right, we'll show you the Humboldt. We'll show you an actual squid, not just be funny. But it was good because it's dark down there. It's wicked dark down there. So here's a Humboldt squid, which is about the size of a person, 5 to 6 feet long. Giant squid live even deeper. So the giant squid, the colossal squid, vampire squid, they're all very deep in the ocean. The giant squid was found. Apparently there was a giant squid found in U.S. waters recently. We don't find too many of them alive. We usually have to find leftovers of them. Some of them passed away and washed up. Sometimes we get video of them. There have been a few videos that have been collected of giant squid. But there's not a lot of evidence of like animal examples that we get because they live so deep. They don't come up to the surface to hang out. So they're living in very deep spaces. We have to go down there with special equipment to figure out where they are and even who they are. So sometimes we don't even know what's down there. Nina's asking, what type of fish do dolphins like to eat? That's a good question. I don't think it usually sticks to one species. Dolphins are pretty smart, and they have a wide variety of dietary items. So let's say, like, we might have a variety of even flavors of ice cream we like to eat, or types of pancakes or breakfast foods. We have a variety just for one kind of part of our meals. Dolphins are the same. They can eat a wide variety of types of fish. Now, here in California, we have, like, sardines and mackerel and yellowfin and rockfish. So depending on if you're a coastal or if you're an offshore dolphin, there's a lot of variety of types of fish that they may eat. And so really, I'm sorry, Nina, there's not just one fish they eat. In some spaces, though, there are very narrow ranges of what they could eat because of how they've been taught to hunt. This is a really special dolphin that uses a sea sponge and puts it over its face, and it scoots around in the sand and stirs up some of the fish, scares them up, drops the sponge and snatches them. And there's not a lot of fish that live in that space, so that particular region where this bottlenose dolphin is found will only eat that kind of fish. So it does kind of depend on where they live, what's around, what's available even, what have they been taught, because some animals only hunt what they have been taught how to hunt. So dolphins have this, sea otters have this, a lot of the whales, a lot of the marine mammals do this. So if a sea otter only knows how to hunt clam and sea stars, they really aren't going to hunt anything else unless they learn and figure it out. So that could happen. They could learn how to hunt something new that they've never hunted before. But in general, they're going to stick to what they know. we have that too. We stick with what we're comfortable with, and otters will do the same. So otters are another interesting animal that we haven't even gotten to yet, and they live in the coastal habitat of the northern Pacific Ocean. So they could go out in the open ocean, so to speak. They're not going to swim straight across the Pacific, but they can swim across large spaces. There was an opportunity for scientists to repopulate Catalina Island, which is about 26 miles that way, specifically west of us, here in the studio anyways. And so they brought some otters down to Catalina, and the otters were like, this isn't my home. And they all swam back to Monterey Bay where they came from, which is not close. I mean, to drive, it's like a 6-hour drive. I can't imagine how quickly an otter would get up there. They do swim pretty fast, and they don't really rest like we do. But they moved from Catalina Island all the way back up to Monterey Bay, so they can swim great distances, but it's not like they went really far offshore. But, you know, Catalina is 26 miles offshore, so they were technically in some open ocean space. All right, I think I got all our questions down here. Oh, how long is a bottlenose dolphin? The offshore bottlenose are around 10 to 12 feet. I think the most might be 14 feet, and they get over 1,000 pounds. They're a big dolphin when we compare them next to a common dolphin or Pacific white-sided, which are like 6 feet. I'm not quite 6 feet, but maybe about 6 feet and a few hundred pounds. So common dolphins are much smaller than the bottlenose dolphins. The coastal bottlenose are a little bit smaller than their offshore counterparts. Still a little bit bigger than a common dolphin, but the offshores are that lighter gray, whereas coastal bottlenose are a darker gray, a little bit smaller, not quite as acrobatic or active at the surface either. Great questions from our viewers today, and thank you so much for our teachers tuning in with us. I hope all your students are learning so much from us. There's a lot of resources on our Aquarium Online Academy page. Don't forget to check those out. There's even our teacher resources tab. If you go all the way to the top of our website, there's an educate button. There are teacher resources within there. So for those of you that are normally homeschooled, or those of you that are schooling at home for now, there's a lot of resources still on our webpage that you can use to help learn more about our open ocean, our coastal ocean, our intertidal ocean. Now, we have a couple minutes left. One last space we didn't quite talk about that kind of exists in the coastal zone are the wetlands and the marshes. A wetland habitat is literally that. It's just wet land. But it's a zone that's very specific. It's right along an edge. It's not the coastline. It's not like the beach because, I mean, parts of it include the beach, but it also includes spaces behind the beach called the salt marshes. So areas where freshwater and saltwater are meeting, and there's plants, and there's birds, there's a lot of animals that use a coastal habitat like a marsh to have their babies, to migrate and feed there. So a lot of these birds may not be here the whole year. These shore birds will feed off the things in the sand, and they may move on. This is a pelican right here. Oh no, that's a great blue heron. Excuse me, that's not a pelican, that's a heron. And the herons will move around. Now, like I said, I grew up in Colorado. We would get seagulls and pelicans in Colorado. Seems like that shouldn't happen, but it's along their migratory pathway. They're moving from a north space to a south space, so they can either find food or find a mate to have babies. And so the coastal wetlands are a massive zone for migratory birds. Really important to protect them. Now, unfortunately, in California, I think over 90% of the wetlands have been built over, destroyed, used for other purposes. But it's a really important space. Baby sharks live here, baby stingrays, baby birds are here too. So there's a lot of life that depends on a wetland habitat. They also sometimes get nicknamed things that make it sound like gross, like it's a bog or it's a swamp. Well, yeah, it's kind of swampy, it's kind of boggy, but they're the marshes and the wetlands, and they're really important as a space for these animals to be in. So not just protecting one space, but protecting all the spaces that animals live in really help our environments stay so diverse and so beautiful so that we can enjoy them in future generations. Well, thank you so much for tuning in and asking so many awesome questions about our coastal habitat today. Now remember, there's going to be more coming up. We're going to be doing moving and grooving today. We're going to be talking about our tide pool habitats. We're going to be talking specifically about seals and sea lions and conservation for them. So keep watching our online academy today, tuning in at 11, 1, and 2 o'clock on Pacific Standard Time. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.